1. Mustard gas tested on American military in 1943, the U.S. Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. The worst of the experiments occurred at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington. 17 and 18-year-old boys were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. The participants, almost all of whom suffered severe external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and, in some cases, threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken materials in pregnant women shortly after World War II. With the impending Cold War forefront on the minds of Americans, many medical researchers were preoccupied with the idea of radioactivity and chemical warfare. In an experiment at Vanderbilt University, 829 pregnant women were given vitamin drinks they were told would improve the health of their unborn babies. Instead, the drinks contained radioactive iron and the researchers were studying how quickly the radioisotope crossed into the placenta. At least 7 of the babies later died from cancers and leukemia, and the women themselves experienced rashes, bruises, anemia, loss of hair and tooth. From 1937 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army developed a covert biological and chemical warfare research experiment called Unit 731. Based in the large city of Harbin, Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most atrocious war crimes in history. Chinese and Russian subjects, men, women, children, infants, the elderly, and pregnant women, were subjected to experiments which included the removal of organs from a live body, amputation for the study of blood loss, germ warfare attacks, and weapons testing. Some prisoners even had their stomachs surgically removed and their esophagus reattached to the intestines. Many of the scientists involved in Unit 731 rose to prominent careers in politics, academia, business,
and the
and
Holocaust. Nazi Germany conducted a series of medical experiments on Jews, POWs, Romani, and other persecuted groups. The experiments were conducted in concentration camps, and in most cases resulted in death, disfigurement, or permanent disability. Especially disturbing experiments included attempts to genetically manipulate twins, bone, muscle, and nerve transplantation, exposure to diseases and chemical gases, sterilization, and anything else the infamous Nazi doctors could think up. After the war, these crimes were tried as part of the Nuremberg trial and ultimately led to the development of the Nuremberg Code of experimentation in North Korea. Several North Korean defectors have described witnessing disturbing cases of human experimentation. In one alleged experiment, 50 healthy women prisoners were given poisoned cabbage leaves. All 50 women were dead within 20 minutes. Other described experiments include the practice of surgery on prisoners without anesthesia, purposeful starvation, beating prisoners over the head before using the zombie-like victims for target practice, and chambers in which whole families are murdered with suffocation gas. It is said that each month, a black van known as the Crow collects 40-50 people from a camp and takes them to a known location for experimentation in the Soviet Union beginning in 1921 and continuing for most of the 21st century. The Soviet Union employed poison laboratories known as Laboratory 1, Laboratory 12, and Camera as covert research facilities of the secret police agencies. Prisoners from the gulags were exposed to a number of deadly poisons, the purpose of which was to find a tasteless, odorless chemical that could not be detected post-mortem. Tested poisons included mustard gas, ricin, digitaxin, and curare, among others. Men and women of varying ages and physical conditions were brought to the laboratories and given the poisons as medication or part in pounds. In 1956 and 1957, the United States Army conducted a number of biological warfare experiments on the cities of Savannah, Georgia, and Avon Park, Florida. In one such experiment, millions of infected mosquitoes were released into the two cities, in order to see if the insects could spread yellow fever and dengue fever. Not surprisingly, hundreds of researchers contracted illnesses that included fevers, respiratory problems, stillbirths, encephalitis, and typhoid. In order to photograph the results of their experiments, Army researchers pretended to be public health workers. Several people died as a result of In 1961, Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University, began a series of social psychology experiments that measured the willingness of test subjects to obey an authority figure. Conducted only 3 months after the start of the trial of German Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, Milgram's experiment sought to answer the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? In the experiment, 2 participants, one secretly an actor and one an unwitting test subject, were separated into 2 rooms where they could hear, but not see, each other. The test subject would then read a series of questions to the actor, punishing each wrong answer with an electric shock. Though many people would indicate their desire to stop the experiment, almost all subjects continued when they were told they would not be held responsible, or that there would not be syphilis study. In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began working with the Tuskegee Institute to track the natural progression of untreated syphilis. 600 poor, illiterate, male sharecroppers were found and hired in Macon County, Alabama. Of the 600 men, only 399 had previously contracted syphilis, and none were told they had a life-threatening disease. Instead, they were told they were receiving free health care, meals, and burial insurance in exchange for participating. Even after penicillin was proven an effective cure for syphilis,